At the funeral home, the scent of lilies had already begun to sour. Grief has a smell, not of flowers, but of fabric worn to long and hands folded to tight. I stood by the door, coat still on, clutching my purse like a lifeline. That's when my son turned to me, eyes dry, and said, "There's room in the back, Mom." No embrace, no guiding arm, just that. I stared at him, wondering if he even heard himself. The pews were lined with faces I had fed, bathed, comforted, yet none turned to meet my eyes. No one stood to offer me the seat beside the casket, beside the man I gave my life to. It was as though I'd been airbrushed out of their memory. So I did what no one expected. I nodded, I turned, I left. I'm Margaret Holloway. I'm 71 years old. And that was the moment I knew, not just that my husband was gone, but that I had already been gone in their eyes for quite some time. Subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks, it didn't happen overnight. These things rarely happen. It's not a single scream, but a long, slow muting. You start by being the one who bakes the pies for Sunday dinners, then the dinners stop. You were the one they called when the baby had a fever. Then they start Googling instead. You become background noise, warm, dependable, but ignorable. But the funeral, that was sacred. Also, I thought we had been married for 48 years. I met Raymond when I was 23, and he brought me home to that creaky brown house with the lilac bush by the mailbox. We built a life there, quiet, steady. I packed his lunches, ironed his shirts, clipped his nails when arthritis crept in. I stood beside him through surgeries, setbacks, and silence. When he grew quieter toward the end, I read to him. I washed his body with lavender soap the day before hospice took over. I was there every moment, until his last, and then, at the service, I was told to sit in the back. I drove home after leaving the chapel, still dressed in black. The house was to clean. My good shoes echoed in the hallway like they didn't belong. I sat on the edge of the bed, his side, still dented, and waited for something to make sense. I tried to reason through it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they had meant to reserve a front pew for me, but deep down, I knew that moment hadn't been careless. It had been chosen. My son, William, had drawn a line, not just in the church, but in our lives. The grief that followed wasn't just for Raymond, it was for the woman I used to be, the one they saw, the one they respected. The next morning, the doorbell rang. A neighbor dropped off a casserole, tuna with crushed crackers on top. I smiled, politely said thank you, and put it in the fridge. I didn't eat it. I couldn't. That evening, I opened the drawer where Raymond used to keep our wills. I stared at the paper with my name on it. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was dissolved. A week passed, no calls from William, no word from my daughter-in-law, who had posted smiling photos from the reception, tagged at the country club where they held the celebration of life. Not once did they check if I had made it home or if I had eaten. It was as if I had been a guest at my own grief. Dismissed once the speeches were done, I stopped answering the phone after that. Let the messages pile up. I didn't want their apologies. I wanted the truth of what I had become to them, an obligation, a shadow, but I would not grovel for warmth. Instead, I began to take inventory, not of things, but of dignity. Where had I lost it? When had I started saying yes when no would have protected me? I remembered holding William's hand when he was 7, walking into school after a bully pushed him. I remembered scrubbing his sheets when he wet the bed until he was 9. I remembered staying up past midnight helping him write college applications while my own body ached from standing there all day. And now, this same boy, now a man, had pointed me to the back like I was someone else's distant cousin. I made tea that night, chamomile, with a touch of honey. Raymond always took his black. I left the second cup untouched beside mine, a memory. In steam, the wind rattled the window pane like it was trying to say something, or maybe just remind me the world outside is still moving, and I could too. That was the beginning, not of something dramatic, not of some loud rebellion, but of a shift, a slow turning inward. I folded my grief into the quiet corners of the house, and somewhere in the silence, I started to see myself again, not as their mother or his widow, just as Margaret. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. It's easy to forget. The years when you were the whole world to someone, until they remind you, not with words, but with absence, that you're no longer even part of theirs. After the funeral, I sat in the quiet of my kitchen most days, hands folded in my lap like I was waiting for someone to arrive. They never did. But I kept thinking about all the days that built them, my children, one packed lunch. One bathed forehead at a time. I was 28 when I had William. He came into the world early and silent, the cord wrapped twice around his neck. I remember the panic in the nurse's voice, the cold air against my legs, the white blur of light above me, but then he cried. And I cried harder. Raymond named him after his father. I wanted to name him after mine, but I let it go. That was the first of many things I let go. 3 years later, we had Emily. She was born in spring, when the daffodils lined the fence like little yellow suns. She slept in a wicker cradle that I'd found at a church rummage sale and lined with the softest flannel I could sew. I remember rocking her through long nights, her tiny breath against my collarbone, while Raymond slept in the other room, his body exhausted from factory shifts. I was a mother before I was anything else. Before I was Margaret again, before I remembered. I had once wanted to be a librarian or a painter or something else with soft solitude, but I don't regret it, not the years, not the effort. What I do regret is how much of myself I dissolved into their needs, thinking that love was best proven through sacrifice. I was the one who knew how they liked their sandwiches, no crust for Emily. Only strawberry jam, William liked his with apple slices on the side and the juice box straw already poked in. I used to draw little faces on their lunch napkins, just in case the day felt too long or too cold. I made sure they had costumes on Halloween, even when money was tight. 1 year, I turned an old bedsheet into a ghost with ruffled sleeves. For Emily, she beamed like I'd stitched magic into the seams. I did. Every stitch, every effort was a kind of quiet magic they never saw. I was the one they called from the nurse's office when they were sick, the one who stayed up during finals week making sure the printer worked. The one who drove to the pharmacy during snowstorms when Emily's asthma flared up. I was the one who learned how to cook vegan for 3 months when William brought home a girl who wouldn't eat butter. I didn't roll my eyes, I adapted. When they went off to college, I mailed care packages. Even when we didn't have extra money, I would buy small things, soft socks, their favorite candy, hand cream. I wrote notes in the margins of novels and tucked them between the pages. I got back quick thank you texts. But not much else when Raymond retired early due to his back. We lived lean. I took in sewing work from neighbours, patching jeans and hemming skirts in the glow of a single table lamp while he rested. I didn't mind. I told myself it was just a phase. When William lost his job in 2009, I co-signed the loan for his car. He promised he'd pay it back in 6 months. He never did, and I never asked. I knew how pride worked, especially in men. I'd seen enough of it in Raymond. When Emily went through her divorce, I watched her children for 2 weeks straight while she cleared her head in Arizona. I missed a routine colonoscopy during that time, but told no one. I just rearranged it, because that's what mothers do, or so I thought. You give, you hold space, you shrink yourself to let others expand, and when you do it long enough, you start to forget you ever had edges of your own. But I remember one winter day, maybe 2014. The roof had a slow leak, and the bucket was back in the hallway again. Raymond had slipped on the icy porch and bruised his hip. William and Emily were both in town for the holidays. I called them, just to ask if they could stop by to help shovel or move a heavy box. No answer. Then I saw a photo online, the two of them at a new wine bar downtown, smiling under string lights. No mention of us. That should have been my clue. But I brushed it off, told myself they were busy, that I didn't want to be a burden. That word, burden, has a weight no mother should ever have to carry. I know now I wasn't asking. Too much. I was asking the wrong people. People who had taken my labour, my love, and made it ordinary. Routine, expected. Raymond, to his credit, always said thank you. Even when the words got shorter near the end, he'd squeeze my hand after dinner. I miss that hand now, even its silence. There's an odd comfort in going over the things you did for others. Not because you want a medal, but because the memory proves you existed, that you were once necessary, once cherished. I look at the worn recipe cards in the tin above the stove. William's favourite stew, Emily's blueberry cake, and wonder if they've ever tried to make them without me. I doubt it. People forget where love comes from when it's always there. They think houses stay warm without fire, but I was on fire. I burned slowly for decades. And at that funeral, when I was told to sit in the back, I realised they didn't even feel the chill when I walked out. That's the part that stayed with me. Not an insult, not even the grief. But the emptiness didn't surprise them. They didn't miss me. At least, not yet. There are the big moments that break your heart, and then there are the small ones that chip at it so slowly, so politely, you barely notice the hollow forming beneath your ribs. I didn't see the distance growing between us, not all at once. It came softly, like moss over stone, quiet, unquestioned, green enough to look alive, until you touch it and feel the cold. After the funeral, I started remembering things differently. Not in a rush of emotion, but in long, slow hours with the television humming low in the background. I'd sit in my chair, the one by the window that still creaked when I leaned back, and run my fingers over the fabric, tracing invisible seams of memory. I remembered Christmas 2 years ago. When I waited for them to arrive, I had roasted the turkey the way Raymond liked, made 3 types of pie, pecan, apple, and lemon chess, just in case. The tree was lit, the table set. I even lit a cinnamon candle in the hall. Though the smell always gave me a slight headache, William texted me at 12 p.m. They weren't coming. Something about traffic and the kids being tired. Emily never called. I packed the food into plastic containers, labeling them in case someone changed their mind. No one did. That night, I ate a turkey sandwich on a paper plate and left the television on longer than usual. I didn't cry, but I did turn the tree lights off early. There was the time Emily stopped sending photos of her children. Used to get one every week, little drawings they made, a missing tooth, a costume for a school play. Then they stopped arriving. I asked once, gently, and she said she'd been too busy. I post them online now. Mom, she said, you should get on that app. I told her I wasn't comfortable with it, that I preferred letters, something I could hold. She laughed, not unkindly, but dismissively, like I was quaint, like I belonged to some world that had passed. I didn't mention it again. Once I left a voicemail on William's phone after Raymond had a fall. Nothing serious, a slip in the garden, some bruising, but I wanted to let him know. I didn't hear back for days when he finally called. It was to ask if I still had the lawnmower. He needed it for a friend. That same week, Emily forwarded me a link for a retirement community near her home. Just in case you ever want to change, she wrote, no punctuation, no warmth. Just a link and the price list. It wasn't that they were cruel. That's the hardest part. If they'd been cruel, I could have fought back, stood up, drawn lines, but they weren't. They were indifferent, and that kind of neglect has no shape to hold. No edge to defend, it just dissolves you. There was the birthday they forgot. My 70th, a milestone they'd once said. I remember baking my own cake that day, not out of sadness, but out of habit, a small vanilla sponge with lemon icing. I put a single candle in the middle and lit it alone, when the phone stayed silent. I told myself they were planning something later, maybe a surprise. The surprise was how normal it felt to be forgotten. I stopped mentioning my doctor visits, stopped updating them on bills or repairs or the cat's health. I learned to Google symptoms and take notes during checkups. I wrote things down, tucked them away. There's a drawer in my desk now filled with paper scraps, questions never asked, memories half-shared. I once read that love is attention. That to love someone is to notice the shape of their silences, if that's true. Then I've been unloved for a very long time. And yet, I still remembered their needs, still kept a tin of Emily's favourite tea in the cupboard, still bought William the same aftershave every December. Even though he stopped wearing it years ago, old habits of the heart are hard to break. They trail behind you like ghost children, always tugging, always hungry. One afternoon, the roof leaked again, just a slow drip near the attic. I dragged the old ladder from the shed, climbed up with aching knees, and patched it with sealant. My arms ached for 2 days afterward. I thought about calling William. I didn't. The silence had become mutual by then. Neighbours waved politely. One of them, Mrs. Klein from 2 doors down, once offered to help me carry groceries. I smiled and said I was fine. It was easier that way. I didn't want pity. I wanted to be remembered without prompting, to be loved without asking. It's the accumulation that wears you down. The 100 quiet hurts, the unreturned voicemails. The birthdays are reduced to emojis, the packages you send that never get acknowledged, the sudden realization that no one asks you what you're reading anymore, that no one asks you anything. Once, Raymond and I were at a small-town fair. It was 1986, I remember, because Whitney Houston was playing from a nearby speaker. There was a ring toss game, and I won a small stuffed bear. We laughed the whole walk home. He carried it the way a boy might carry a trophy, his hand wrapped tight around its paw. That night, he kissed my temple and whispered, "I see you." No one says that to me now. No one sees me. I think that's why the funeral hurt the way it did. Not just because of what was said, or where I was told to sit, but because it confirmed something I had quietly suspected for years. That my place in their lives had shifted so far to the edges, I was no longer visible, and yet I kept showing up, kept baking, mailing, and remembering, until that morning. Until the front row stayed full, and I stayed unseen. There's a loneliness that grows not from being alone, but from being forgotten while still alive. I walk past mirrors now and wonder what they see when they look at me, if they see anything at all. But I do. I see me, fainter, perhaps, quieter, but still here. And something about that is starting to feel powerful. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind that slips past without notice. A little grey around the edges, a slow drizzle tapping against the kitchen window, the cat curled up like punctuation at the end of the counter. I was washing a single cup in the sink when the letter slid through the mail slot. Quiet, almost apologetic. The envelope was cream-coloured, with my name typed neatly in black. I didn't open it right away. There was a time when letters meant birthday wishes for church bulletins, or updates from my sister in Vermont. These days, they are rarely personal. Bills mostly, notices, reminders that things were due, but this one had weight to it. The paper was thick, too deliberate to be junk, when I sat down to read it. The words didn't make sense at first. Legal language has a way of hiding cruelty behind politeness. I read it 3 times before the meaning truly sank in. My name had been quietly removed from the deed to the house. the same house Raymond and I had paid off over 37 years. Through long winters, job losses, hospital bills, the house. We painted together one summer with leftover buckets from the hardware store, laughing when the porch ended up a shade to blue. The house I scrubbed, repaired, cooked in, mourned in. The house where I brought both my children home from the hospital, carried in my arms with the same hope and fear every mother feels. And now it no longer belonged to me. William had started the process just after Raymond's passing. While I was still adjusting to the echo in our bed, while I was still learning how to sleep on one side of the mattress without reaching, he had gone to a lawyer, not our family lawyer, but someone new, and filed paperwork transferring the title into a trust that listed him and Emily as co-trustees. I was named only as a lifetime resident, not an owner. I could live there, they said, as long as I wanted. As long as I followed certain conditions, it read like a lease dressed up in softer words. No one had spoken to me. I sat very still after reading it. My tea had gone cold beside me, untouched. The quiet of the house pressed in like fog. It wasn't anger I felt, not then. It was something deeper, like an absence that had grown roots inside me. I pulled out the file box from the hallway closet, the one with all our records. I checked the original deed, our names side by side, Margaret and Raymond Holloway. I ran my finger over the ink, as if that would bring it back, and then, tucked between two utility bills, I found the change of ownership notice. It had been mailed weeks ago. I'd mistaken it for another flyer. My own life had been altered and I hadn't even noticed. That was the worst part, how easy it had been for them to erase me. How little noise it made when I called the lawyer listed at the bottom of the letter. A woman answered. Kind voice, firm, she said William had mentioned wanting to help manage things for his mother's sake, that the arrangement protected the property. I asked her from whom. She didn't have an answer. That night, I walked through the house room by room, not out of paranoia, but ceremony. I touched the banister that Raymond had race-stained one fall. I opened the drawer in the hallway where we'd kept stamps and spare keys. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the floor, scuffed from decades of footsteps. Mine, theirs, high, everything looked the same, and yet it wasn't mine. Emily called later that week, cheerful, distracted. I asked her, calmly, if she knew about the deed. There was a pause. Then she said, "It's just a precaution, Mom. You're getting older. We need to make sure everything's streamlined." I said nothing. She went on about estate taxes, probate, all the things she had learned from a seminar at her office. She said it like she was doing me a favor, like I should be grateful they were thinking ahead. I hung up and sat in the dark for a long time. No music, no lights, just the soft hum of the refrigerator, the only thing in that moment still loyal to its purpose. There's a particular betrayal in being parented by your own children. When they decide they know better, not out of love, but out of convenience. They take your autonomy like a coat they think you no longer need, and you're left shivering in your own home. I didn't tell anyone, not the neighbors, not the women from church. I couldn't bear the look of sympathy, of pity. I didn't want to be the woman they whispered about, the one whose children had taken everything but her silence. Instead, I watered the plants, I dusted the shelves. I kept the rhythm of a life that was no longer legally mine. I smiled at. The mailman waved at Mrs. Klein, but inside, something was shifting. I thought back to a story my grandmother once told me about a bird that kept returning to the same windowsill every spring. Even after the tree it once nested in had been cut down, it pecked at the glass, confused. It remembered something that no longer existed. That's how I felt. Like I had come home to a place that still looked like mine, but no longer recognized me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. The funeral had already shown me my place. This was just the paperwork, but it was the final line. And I knew, with bone-deep certainty, I would never cross it again. After the letter, after the phone call that masked betrayal in practical terms, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't fight. I didn't even call them back. Some people erupt when they're hurt. I recede. I've always believed silence can speak louder than grief, if you let it, so I let it go. The morning after I read the deed papers, I poured my tea the same way I always did, with 1 teaspoon of honey and a bit of cream. I sliced the same piece of toast, but I sat in a different chair, not mine, not his, just a different one. It sounds small, but it changed how the light hit the table. It changed how I felt in my own kitchen. That was the first shift. I stopped sending holiday cards that year. I didn't call to ask what the grandkids wanted for Christmas. I didn't ask if I was invited. I didn't ask anything at all. It's amazing how quickly a phone goes quiet when you stop chasing it. I didn't stop living, though. That's what people often misunderstand about silence. It isn't the absence of life, it's the presence of self. I started waking up earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted the house to myself in its earliest, gentlest hour. I opened the curtains wide and let the pale sun find the dust no one else would ever notice. I rearranged the living room, turned the sofa to face the window instead of the television. I wanted to see the birds more than I wanted to hear voices. Somewhere around mid-February, I began keeping notebooks. Not journals, exactly. I wasn't pouring my heart out in loops of dramatic ink, but observations, prices of groceries, little quotes I liked, bits of conversation I overheard at the bakery. I kept a list of flowers that bloomed well in shade, another list of books I still wanted to read. I had never made time for lists before. I had always been too busy remembering everything for everyone else. I checked the gutters, raked the yard, and cleaned the baseboards. I did all the things that made a house hum, but I stopped doing them in the way that hopes to be seen. No one was watching anymore. No one thought to ask what I was doing with my days. So I gave those days back to myself. I found a lawyer quiet, kind, thorough, not a friend of the family, not connected to anyone who would report back. I walked into her office with the envelope and sat across from her, my spine straight. I need to understand what I still own, I told her. She studied the trust documents, her brow pulling together in a small, sad knot. You don't own anything anymore, she said, gently. It wasn't new information, but hearing it out, loud, in that neutral room with its mint-coloured walls and steady ticking clock, made it real in a way I could not undo. We talked about options, my rights, what I could do, what I couldn't. She didn't promise justice. She didn't promise anything, but she listened, and that was something. I began withdrawing small amounts from my personal savings, nothing large enough to raise alarms. Just enough to start an envelope in the back of my closet, under the sweaters I hadn't worn in years. I called it my weather money, because eventually the sky always changes. I also started reading more, not fiction, not yet. I wasn't ready to lose myself in someone else's dreams. I read about estate law, about elder rights. I read about women who had been erased from their own lives and found a way back in. I underlined passages, I folded corners, I made a small, private education out of what had been done to me. But I never called William, not once. I didn't confront him, or Emily, or their lawyer. I didn't announce my disappointment. The thing about silence is that it makes people nervous. It forces them to sit with what they've done without the luxury of arguing their case. That spring, Emily sent a text asking if I needed help around the house. It had been 3 months since we last spoke. I didn't reply. A week later, she sent another message, this time with a photo of her daughter, wearing a dance costume. She misses you, the text read. I sat on the porch with the message open on my lap, watching a sparrow land on the railing. The girl probably did miss me, but Emily didn't, and I wouldn't confuse the two. I started walking more, a mile each morning, sometimes two. I changed routes every week, past different houses. Noticed how paint peeled or tulips emerged from forgotten corners of soil. I liked the feeling of being unnoticed, unimportant to anyone's schedule but my own. I stopped volunteering at the church bake sale. I let someone else take the sign-up clipboard at bingo night. People noticed, but only faintly. We missed you last week, they'd say, like I'd caught a cold. I just smiled and said I'd been busy. But busy with what? With being, with existing without justification. With learning that survival doesn't always look like defiance. Sometimes it looks like putting your good china back on the shelf, not because company is coming, but because you're the one who deserves to drink from it. I went silent, yes, but in that silence, I started hearing the sound of my own life. Again, the creak of the floorboard near the stairs, the way the clock in the hallway ticks just a second too fast, the way my breath sounds when I'm not trying to hold it in. They hadn't stolen my voice. I just stopped giving it away, and in the quiet that followed, something else bloomed, not anger. Not vengeance, but clarity that I didn't owe anyone the explanation they never gave me. Clarity that silence, when chosen, is not surrender, it's space, and I intended to fill that space carefully, deliberately, and on my own terms. You don't need a thunderclap to change a life. Sometimes it begins with a whisper, a decision made in the kitchen while stirring a pot of soup, or in a quiet aisle of the hardware store while holding a roll of weather stripping. That's how it began for me, nothing grand. No grandstanding, just a quiet shift in the air around my choices. After the silence settled into its rhythm, I started to move differently, not out of bitterness, but out of intention. My routines became mine again. Shaped not by others' needs but by my own curiosity, I found a small cafe 2 towns over that served the kind of coffee I used to drive half an hour to find back when Raymond had appointments in the city, a dark roast with cardamom and honey. The woman behind the counter remembered my name after the 3rd visit. I started going once a week. I'd sit by the window with my coat still buttoned and write little things in my notebook, observations, half-thoughts, the shape of clouds. I changed my hair. It sounds silly now, but it felt symbolic. I went to a stylist I'd never met before, someone recommended by the woman at the cafe. I asked for something shorter, cleaner, with fewer apologies in the strands. When I looked in the mirror afterward, I almost didn't recognize myself, not because I looked younger, I didn't, but because I looked like someone who had chosen. That spring, I moved money, quietly. Methodically, the envelope in the closet had grown thick enough to need a rubber band. I took it to the bank in 3 small trips, depositing it into a new account under my full maiden name, Margaret Joan Fields. It felt strange and lovely to say it aloud again. The teller smiled and handed me the receipt. She didn't know. She was handing me a piece of myself I'd put away decades ago. I cancelled the automatic payments I had set up for the house maintenance. William had taken over the deed. Let him take the plumbing bills too. I stopped grocery shopping for guests who never came. I started buying what I liked, raspberries even in winter, almond milk, which Raymond had always said tasted like water. I started cooking smaller meals, warm things in bowls with a drizzle of olive oil, eaten in silence and satisfaction. I also began researching senior apartments, not because I needed to leave, but because I wanted to know what leaving might look like if it came from me. There's power in considering your exit, even when you're not ready to walk through the door. I visited one, just one, tucked behind a library, with flower boxes in every window and a walking trail lined with benches. The rooms were small but sunlit. A woman named Teresa gave me the chore, and when she asked why I was looking, I just said, I'm curious about living on my own terms. She nodded without asking for more. I liked her for that. One morning, about a month after my first visit to the new cafe, I opened the attic trunk. It hadn't been touched since before Raymond passed. Inside were letters, photographs, receipts from our first house. I sorted through it slowly, choosing what to keep. Not everything deserved to follow me forward. I donated 3 coats to boxes of books. And a cabinet full of dishes we hadn't used since the kids moved out. I kept the ones I liked, the chipped blue bowl, the sugar spoon with the tiny dent, the teacup from my mother. I didn't ask myself what they would want. I asked myself what I wanted. The silence between me and the children stretched. No one came to visit. Emily sent her few texts, thinking of you or hope you're well. I never replied. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I no longer needed to explain my stillness. William sent nothing, and yet I didn't feel lonely. There's a strange sweetness in reclaiming your time. I started attending their poetry group at the library. I didn't share anything for the first few weeks. I just listened. But one day, a woman named Ruth brought a piece about being invisible in her own kitchen, and something cracked open in me. After the session, I handed her a line one. Had scribbled on a napkin, sometimes the quietest people are holding the loudest truths. She hugged me. We've been walking the trail together every Thursday since. I also opened a safe deposit box, not out of fear, but out of preparation. I put inside a folder with my will, some photos, my new banking information, and a letter. Just one, addressed to no one in particular. It begins, "This is what I chose, because no one else chose me. I began to sleep better, not longer, just deeper." There was a kind of release in no longer waiting for apologies that weren't coming. I painted one of the bedrooms, a soft sage green. I didn't ask anyone what they thought. I hung new curtains and found a small framed print of a woman standing alone on a cliff, hair blowing in the wind. The tag on the back read, "Solitude is not sadness, it is space," and that's what I have now, space. Not just in the physical sense, but in the way my mind moved, in how I walked slower through the grocery store, in how I no longer feared the silence in the house. I had made peace with it. I had made friends with it. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their explanations. I was done being the unspoken hinge in their door frame. I was building something new, not a house, not a future I could hand over to anyone, but a present I could hold in my own 2 hands. And for the first time in years, they were empty not from loss, but from choosing not to carry what wasn't mine. I moved differently after that, not in defiance, in design. I wasn't waiting to be invited to the front row anymore. I was building my own seat, somewhere quiet, somewhere honest, somewhere no one could ask me to leave. When I stepped back, they didn't notice at first. That's always how it begins. You stop reaching out, and the silence stretches, but no one rushes to fill it. It's quiet, but revealing, like pulling away a tablecloth and realizing how little was actually resting on it. In the early weeks after I chose silence, I imagined they would come knocking. Maybe not literally, but at least in some gentle gesture, a letter, a visit, a true question, not the kind padded with politeness. But nothing came. That should have hurt, but strangely, it didn't. Because while I had stepped back from them, I had stepped into something else, something sturdier, a kind of peace. Still, life has a way of circling back, and the consequences of absence, real absence, don't go unnoticed forever. I found out from a neighbour that William had been by the house one afternoon in June. I was out walking when he came. He left no note, just checked the mailbox, walked the perimeter like a man taking inventory, and left. I imagined him standing there, expecting a familiar scene. Flowers watered, trash bins lined up, the scent of lavender drifting from the porch, but I hadn't watered the flowers that week. The bins were still at the curb, the front light bulb had gone out. I had left it, on purpose, Not exactly, but also not accidentally. I think that moment seeing the home out of rhythm was the first time he realized something had changed. They had relied on me not just as a person, but as a system. When they hosted birthdays, I made the cake. When flu season came, I stocked the pantry. I sent reminders, brought umbrellas, remembered appointments no one thanked me for. They lived in a world where the wheels turned smoothly because I kept them greased behind the scenes. Without complaint, and now the engine was starting to sputter. Emily called again in July. This time she left a voicemail longer than usual. Her voice wasn't rushed. It was low, uncertain. "I know we haven't really talked," she began, "but things feel off. I just wanted to check on you. Call me." I didn't, not to be cruel, but because I had no update to offer that they had earned. I was well. Perhaps better than I'd ever been, but I didn't need them to know that their worry wasn't my responsibility anymore. Later that summer, I heard through Ruth that Emily had hosted a barbecue for her in-laws. She had forgotten the charcoal, burned the corn, and undercooked the chicken. One of the neighbors had asked, "Didn't your mom usually help with these things?" Emily laughed. "Not anymore," she'd said, with that tight kind of smile people wear when they're trying to pretend the air isn't heavier than it is. They were learning that absence isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the small unravelings, the untied shoe, the misstep, the flavour that's just not quite right in late August. I received a letter from William, not typed, handwritten. A bit rushed, a few crossed out words, but his handwriting nonetheless. He asked if I was angry. Said he didn't understand why I was shutting them out. He mentioned the house. Said he hoped I knew I could still stay as long as you want. As long as I want. That phrase again, it made me pause. I folded the letter and placed it in the safe deposit box, not out of spite, out of documentation. It was proof of how little he still understood. He hadn't lost me because I wanted something in return. I never did. I lost him because he never learned how to see me when I asked for nothing. By September, Emily had tried twice more. Once with a package, a book she thought I'd like, one I'd already read years ago and underlined from cover to cover. Another time with a bouquet of tulips, delivered without a note. I placed the book on my shelf, unopened. The tulips wilted. After 6 days, I didn't refresh the water. They were gestures of discomfort, not reconciliation. The kind people send when they feel the absence, but haven't yet felt the lesson. And still, I watched from a distance. Ruth told me that William had asked about me at church, quietly. On the steps after a Sunday service, "Is she okay?" He'd asked, as though I were a fragile rumour. That same week, I overheard someone at the cafe saying Emily had left work early, something about needing to help with the kids more. Her husband had taken on a second shift, and her youngest had started wetting the bed again. The tapestry was fraying. I wasn't glad. I wasn't vengeful. I was simply aware that what I once gave them had been mistaken for permanence, and now, like a garden left unattended. They were learning the cost of neglect, what they lost. Without me wasn't just convenience. It wasn't just birthday reminders or steady hands in the kitchen. They lost a keeper of memory. They lost the woman who knew what calmed their fears, who read their silences like chapters, who saw the moment a cloud passed across their joy and offered comfort without question. They lost the woman who didn't need to be asked to show up. And in their loss, I gained something profound, clarity, not power. I never wanted power over them, just the simple, quiet clarity of what I was worth, not because they had taken it, but because I had finally seen it for myself. They lost the gravity that kept things balanced, and I had found my center again. It didn't come with applause, it didn't come with forgiveness, but it came, and it stayed. It had been nearly a year since Raymond's funeral, a year. Since I'd been ushered to the back pew like a stranger at my own husband's farewell, since then I had moved slowly but fully into my solitude, not out of bitterness, but by choice. My silence had become my shelter, my routines, my rituals, my peace, and yet, as the anniversary crept closer, I felt something unsettled in me. Not grief, that had already melted into the folds of my days, but something quieter, a kind of unfinished sentence, a word left unsaid, but not forgotten. That's when I knew I needed to write a letter, not to William, not to Emily. Not even to Raymond, to myself, the woman I had been. It was early October when I sat down at the old roll-top desk in the guest room. The one with the stiff drawer that sticks unless you pull it just right. I lit a single beeswax candle, not for drama, but for focus. The window was cracked open. The breeze carried the scent of dry leaves and faraway chimney smoke, the kind of air that reminds you everything is dying and everything is beginning again. I took out my best stationery. Cream paper, slightly embossed edges, a gift from years ago, still unopened in its box. I uncapped the pen, black ink, fluid, final, and I began. Dear Margaret, you gave them everything, and they thanked you with distance. You carried their childhoods in your hands, soft and trembling, and they grew strong by forgetting the shape of those hands, but you never stopped loving them. Even when they let go of your voice like it was something too quiet to matter, even when they took the house and called it helping. Even when they left you in the back row, as if decades could be folded and filed behind newer, louder loves, you stayed, you held on, you tried. But here's the truth, the one you've taken a lifetime to see, you do not need to be remembered by them to remember yourself. You are not a role, not a title, not just mother or wife or widow. You are Margaret Joan Fields. You once danced barefoot on a dock in 1974. Laughing so loudly you startled the birds. You once stitched a dress from nothing but scraps and made it look like something out of a magazine. You once sat by Raymond's hospital bed for 19 nights without sleep, whispering stories into the quiet so he wouldn't be afraid to go. You have loved so many people through so much silence. But now, finally, you are allowed to love yourself. In the noise of your own becoming. Let go of the ache to be understood. Let go of the fantasy that they will apologize. Let go of the hope that they'll ever see what they missed when they stopped asking how you were. They lost something beautiful when they stopped listening. But you found it. You found your mornings again, your coffee in your favorite chair, your walks with no destination. You've found your own face in the mirror, not softened by service, but sharpened by survival. You've learned that silence can bloom like a wildflower if you let it grow without shame, and most of all, you've learned that being alone is not the same as being empty. You are not a shell, you are the sea. Love me, I sat back when I finished. The room had gone still around me. The candle flickered once, then settled. I folded the letter slowly, deliberately, and placed it inside the top drawer. I didn't seal it. Something shouldn't be hidden from future versions of ourselves. That night, I didn't sleep right away. I lay in bed with the covers pulled to my chin, listening to the soft tick of the hallway clock. I thought of all the times I'd told myself to wait for the right moment to speak. Wait for their moods to shift, wait for the love to return, like it had before. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I was writing, reclaiming, naming what had happened and what hadn't, and letting both belong to me. The next morning, I walked the same trail I always did with Ruth. She noticed something different in my eyes. You're standing straighter, she said. I smiled, not wide. Just enough to tell her she was right. Afterward, I went home and opened the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. I took out the photo album from our early years, the one with the cracked leather binding and yellowed pages. I looked at each picture and spoke the names out loud. I said them not for nostalgia, but for recognition. These were the people who had shaped me, who I had shaped. And now I could finally see myself in those pages, not just as a background figure, but as the heart of a house, of a history, of a life. They may not remember the quiet things I did. The way I folded their shirts, the way I kept track of their favorite songs, the way I memorized every cough and cry and scent. They may never fully see it, but I do, and that's enough. The letter changed me, because it came from the only person who truly knew the weight of what I carried. It came from the woman who had walked every hard mile and still chose to stand. Not in the back row, not in silence, but in her own truth. At last, the house is still. Not silent in the way grief once made it, but quiet in the way a pond is before sunrise, soft, alive, undisturbed. That's how my life feels now, not empty, just finally uncluttered. Most mornings begin the same way. I wake up around 6. Before the neighborhood stirs, I open the window even when it's cool, just to let the air in. I boil water for tea, Earl Grey, a splash of milk, and sit by the kitchen window as the light moves across the floor, that moment when the day has just begun and no one needs anything from me. Is my favorite part of being alive. I've stopped trying to measure time in the shape of other people's footsteps. I no longer wait for calls, for visits, for recognition. There's a freedom in letting go of the expectation that someone will meet you where you are. Instead, I met myself every day. Sometimes I take long walks through the neighborhood without any destination. I nod to familiar faces. I stop to admire the ivy creeping along a stone wall near the corner of pine and larch. There's an old elm tree there that I swear leans more with each passing month. Like even it is tired of holding itself up for others. I understand that feeling. I understand it and love it. The library knows me by name now. I sit in the far corner, under the fiction shelves, and work my way through stories I never had time for. I linger in sentences. I reread paragraphs just because I like the way they sound. There's something sacred about time spent with words you choose yourself, without anyone waiting on dinner or calling from another room. Ruth and I still walk every Thursday. Sometimes we talk, sometimes we don't. She brings small candies in her coat pocket, lemon drops, mostly, and shares them without ceremony. We don't ask each other for explanations, we just keep walking. The rhythm of our feet on gravel is enough. A few weeks ago, I repainted the back bedroom. I chose a color that reminded me of the ocean, not the bright summer blue, but the deep kind you see on stormy days, moody and still full of life. I moved a small desk there. It's where I write now, not letters to anyone, just thoughts, memories I don't want to lose. Dreams I once had that still visit me at night. Sometimes I wonder what William and Emily say about me now, whether they think I've gone cold or distant or stubborn. Whether they understand that my silence was not a punishment but a boundary, whether they miss what they lost. I don't dwell on it, but the wondering still knocks on the back door of my thoughts from time to time. I didn't remove them from my heart, just from my daily effort. I no longer water something that doesn't grow. But I think I will always love them, not for who they are now, but for who they once were, for who I once was when I held them in my arms and believed that love would be enough. Maybe one day they'll understand what I gave, or maybe they won't, but that understanding is no longer the currency I live by. My life is measured differently now. In cups of tea I drink slowly. In books I finish and return with handwritten notes left inside the covers. On Sunday mornings with the radio low and the cat curled against my hip, in the sound of a pen moving across paper when the rest of the world is still asleep. I plant tulips now, not for anyone to see, but because I like the way they push through even the coldest earth. That resilience, that gentle insistence on blooming despite everything, feels familiar. It feels like me. The deed to the house still doesn't bear my name, but the life inside it. The colour of the walls, the scent of lavender from the linens, the worn groove in the chair by the window is mine in every way that counts. There are no more front rows to sit in, no more holidays I plan around others, no more hoping for invitations. I celebrate my own seasons now. I bake a cake if I feel like it. I light a candle when the day feels too heavy. I play music and dance slowly in the kitchen while the kettle sings. No one is watching, and I think that's why it finally feels real. A woman once told me that peace doesn't arrive with trumpets. It slips in like light under a door, unnoticed at first, but unmistakable once it fills the room. That's how this quiet feels, not lonely, just full of space I no longer feel ashamed to take up. People say that when children grow up, the roles reverse, that they care for you the way you once cared for them. That might be true for some, but for me, the reversal wasn't caregiving. It was clear. They turned away, and I turned inward. And what I found in that inward turn was a woman who had always been there, waiting for her own hand to reach back. I keep that letter I wrote to myself in the drawer beside my bed. I read it on days when the wind is sharp and the world feels thin. It reminds me that I am not invisible. I am not forgotten. I am not gone. I am here. My life is quiet now, and that's enough. I wasn't angry. I was finally empty, and that was beautiful.